Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Well, today we have a special edition of the show where we recapture the finest moments and commentary, bringing you the best of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. To start today, we have a very special guest who has come all the way to our studios here in Tel Aviv from Ramallah. Ashraf al-Adrami is the former Palestinian Minister of Prisoner Affairs from 1984 to 1996. A whole 12 years, al-Adrami was in Israeli prisons, but today he's become an author and researcher who is pushing for peace. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, you know, we're going to talk about a very hot topic that's been going on in the news lately. Will the Palestinian Authority and Hamas finally unite? Well, it looks like both Palestinian groups have actually reached a reconciliation deal brokered by Egypt. Hamas is now set to relinquish control of the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, but the Israeli government doesn't seem to be very happy about the entire affair. Now, what do you think is, what does this reconciliation deal mean for the future of the region as a whole in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Yes, the reconciliation process is needed for the unification of the Palestinian leadership, because the Israeli government all the time has this large excuse that they can't have a deal with the Palestinian leadership because they don't represent all the Palestinians, and the Palestinian territories are divided between Gaza Strip and West Bank. Who will control Gaza, and what are the guarantees that Hamas won't get the power in the West Bank and endangers the Israeli security? Nowadays, there is a process that can unify the Palestinian territories and the Palestinian political leadership, and it will be good for the Israelis to go ahead in a situation to have a peaceful agreement with the Palestinian leadership. It is a very complicated process, and it is also difficult to have this unity after 10 years of division and 10 years of maybe hostile actions.
Now, obviously, we're going to get more into the specifics of some of the issues that we may face, specifically how Israel feels about the fact that Hamas is in this unity government. But Professor Dershowitz, what is your response to what our guest is saying?
Well, I think anything that brings us closer to peace, negotiation, reconciliation, a two-state solution is to be encouraged. As usual, the devil is in the details. It really depends not only on whether the leadership of Hamas and the Palestinian Authority get together and can negotiate with a single voice, but also who controls the military wing of Hamas. Israel is not going to negotiate with a government that includes Hamas as long as the Hamas military wing calls for the destruction of Israel and allows rockets to be sent at Israeli civilians living in Sderot and other areas. So I think it's important to see whether or not the Palestinian Authority or the United Palestinian Authority and Hamas are prepared to collectively renounce violence, enter into negotiations, agree that compromise is necessary, whether Hamas is prepared to recognize Israel, whether ultimately the united Hamas and Palestinians are prepared to say the magic words, namely recognizing Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, and thereby implementing the mandate of the UN from 1947 when they divided mandatory Palestine into, quote, two states for two people. One, the Jewish people, namely Israel, and one, the Arab Palestinians who live in the mandate area, which would today be a Palestinian state. So much remains to be seen, much remains to be done, but initially I would be encouraged by efforts to try to speak with one voice, as long as that voice is the voice of peace, compromise, and negotiation.
Now, Professor Dershowitz, let's break down some of the comments that you just made. The Israeli cabinet has given a set of preconditions regarding this reconciliation agreement. The first two points that the points that the Israeli cabinet raised were not new, but were set by the quartet over a decade ago. First, the requirement that Hamas recognize Israel, and second, that the group stop all terrorist activities. So, can Israel truly accept a deal involving Hamas? What is your take on that?
I think it is in the Israeli interest to have Hamas within the Palestinian political leadership, especially after Hamas accepted the establishing of an independent state in 1967 borders, which is indirectly recognition of Israel. Hamas will engage in the Palestinian political leadership in PLO, which recognized Israel and which also get off of the armed struggle and violence, and Hamas will be committed to the rules of the PLO, and I think it is the favor of Israel to get Hamas in, not a situation that Hamas is the enemy of Israel on its borders.
Now, Israel raised demands, obviously, to disarm Hamas. Can Abbas really convince Hamas to lay down its weapons?
I don't think so. In this stage, Israel started 4 wars to disarm Hamas and didn't succeed. President Mahmoud Abbas has no power at this moment to disarm Hamas. But if Hamas will engage into the Palestinian leadership as part of the decision makers of the Palestinian, it will be the arms of Hamas will be under the control of the leadership, and it is gradually will be within the Palestinian security services. But we don't do it just by one step. It is very complicated. It needs time, and it needs also efforts from all the parties, even from Israel to ease the conditions in Gaza Strip and to encourage people to go ahead in a peaceful process that can bring a two-state solution.
Our first video comes from Fonda, who cares passionately about politics. After watching one of our shows, Fonda, who coincidentally was born the day before you were in 1938, felt compelled to challenge one of your statements.
Sure.
Let's hear from her.
Good afternoon, Professor Dershowitz. My name is Fonda. I'm a South African living in Eilat. On a recent program, you were asked a question on what your thoughts were on a two-state solution. You replied it was the only viable one. You then said that Abbas was to blame for not wanting to negotiate. My question to you is, what's left to negotiate when Netanyahu continues building and expanding new settlements? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vanya. You're a day older than me, so I have to be respectful and defer to your seniority. But I don't think there's any inconsistency between wanting a two-state solution and Israel's current settlement policies. Israel has shown that it can pull back settlements as it did in Gaza. It will do so. Most of the expansion that we're seeing now in Israel is expansion up rather than out, expansion within settlements or in Jerusalem. I don't necessarily approve of those, but I don't think it undercuts the desire for peace. I repeat what I said, that until Abbas is prepared to say the following words, there won't be peace. I recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. I accept two states for two people, as mandated by the United Nations in 1947. Abbas refuses to do that. But right now, I don't want to point fingers of blame. I would like to bring Abbas and Netanyahu together to the negotiating table. I know that Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt are working very, very hard on some new ideas involving peace processes. I want to be as helpful as I can. I think Israelis should be as helpful as they can. I hope and I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is very much open to the prospect of a two-state solution as long as the Palestinian state doesn't pose a danger to Israel. The security issues are paramount, and I hope we can come to some resolution. But I do not think that it's fair to blame Prime Minister Netanyahu or the settlement policy on the refusal. The Palestinians could have had a state in 1938, 1948, 2000, 2001, 2008. They turned it down every time. And yes, it's, I think, a little harder now because the conservative influences on Israeli politics. But the blame must primarily lie with Palestinian leadership, which refused to accept statehood. They never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I hope now both sides see this as a very good time for a peaceful resolution. I think if Israel were to make peace with the Palestinians, it would increase its opportunities to also make peace with the Sunni nations, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and other countries who were united against Iran. So this is a perfect time for both sides to compromise. I hope it will happen.
All right, Professor Dershowitz, turning to our next topic. This is a story that has been plaguing Israel for years now. In September of 2014, an Ethiopian-Israeli man crossed into the Gaza Strip from Israel. Avera Mengistu was then captured and interrogated by Hamas and has been missing ever since. Mengistu had crossed into the Strip on his own accord, but had been suffering from mental illness for several years. His family has been pleading for help, claiming the Israeli government is not helping return Mengistu because of his Ethiopian ethnicity. Now, here is a message from his cousin.
Hi, this is Avera Mengistu. I'm Yonit, and I'm a cousin and neighbor of the Mengistu family. I grew up with Avera. I knew him. He was a charismatic young boy. His illness was hard for the family, but it doesn't compare to what they are going through since he was captured. I see the mother, the father, the brothers and the sisters living a life in the shadow of his absence. Life has stopped for this family, and this is nothing compared to what Avera must be going through. Save him.
Now, before you respond, Professor, joining us now in the studio is Eli Bachal, who served as the chief legal advisor for the Israeli Security Agency, otherwise known as the Shabak or Shin Bet. Eli currently works at the Israel Democracy Institute, but has been volunteering his time as the member of the committee for Avera Mengistu alongside other members of the Wexner-Harvard program, such as your friend Danny Grossman and former Counsel General Nadav Tamir. Eli, thank you so much for joining us. Now, why isn't Israel taking more action to get this man released? We saw the Gilad Shalit prisoner exchange take place. How is this different?
I don't want to criticize anyone, and the government just nominated the new coordinator to negotiate, the chief negotiator regarding the Israelis that are captured by the Hamas. But I think that after more than 3 years that Avera Mengistu is there and there is no sign of life from him, it's time to push things forward and to give and to put a lot of pressure, international and in Israel, to bring anything from him, sign of life, and him back here to Israel.
But what's so interesting is that this doesn't seem to be a major issue here in Israel. The Israeli public isn't talking about this very frequently.
Well, that's a problem, and I think that we, the volunteers, are trying to bring more solidarity within the Israeli society and to the Jewish people. Tonight, the family is going to the US, participating in the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations in Los Angeles for this exact purpose, and then move to Washington, D.C. and to New York City to meet with officials, with congressmen, and others from the UN, and trying to gain support to their struggle to see their son back home.
Professor, why do you think that this man has not yet been released and Israel hasn't been working harder to make that happen?
Well, first, we don't know how hard Israel is working behind the scenes, but the one thing I would categorically reject, certainly from the American Jewish community, and I suspect from the Israeli Jewish community, I do not think this has anything to do with race or with his color. I'll tell you why. If he were a soldier who were captured and being held hostage, I think every American Jew and I think every Israeli would be demanding his immediate release. I think the distinction is not that he's Ethiopian and Gilad Shalit was not. It's that Shalit was a soldier and was captured. Here's a man who wandered as a result of tragic mental illness, but nonetheless wandered over the border illegally. It's a strong, compassionate case, but it's not as strong a case from the point of view of Israel's policy of leaving no one behind, never allowing a soldier to remain behind. I will work as hard as I can for Avera's release, but I don't think it should be blamed on race, certainly not race alone, because I really do believe to the depths of my heart that if an Ethiopian Jewish soldier were captured by Hamas during a battle or tragically killed and his body not recovered, I do think that Israel would be devoting as much effort to getting back a black soldier as a white soldier. And I'd have to see very, very strong evidence to the contrary to persuade me that race was the critical factor here, rather than his status as a non-soldier who wandered over the border as the result of mental illness. Compassionate, yes, but the strongest, as stronger cases as Gilad Shalit, no, I don't believe it is.
This month, Jews across the world are commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. Now, the declaration was a public statement issued by the British government during the First World War to announce support for the establishment of a nation-state for the Jewish people in Palestine. Professor Gilboa, this moment in history was, clearly one of the most important for the Jewish people. But up until today, Palestinians across the world mourn its happening. And then the Balfour Declaration was not a legal document, right? So why is it still causing such an uproar?
Well, I think that we need to look at the Balfour Declaration in a somewhat different way. Boris Johnson, the British Minister of Foreign Affairs, wrote an op-ed article published in Israel just 2 or 3 days ago. And he said that the only way to resolve the Arab-Israeli or Israeli-Palestinian conflict is to establish 2 states, partition. And even he went back to the Peel Commission of 1937, which was the first, say, official committee to recommend partition. And then partition was decided also by the United Nations General Assembly on November 1947. And since then, there were many, many attempts to resolve the conflict based on partition. And it has never worked. So the reason for the absence of a conflict resolution or peace between Israel and Palestinians is not the territorial issue. It is something much deeper. And I think that Boris Johnson and maybe also successive American presidents, including even President Trump, are going to fail because they do not recognize the root cause of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is the unwillingness of the Palestinians to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The Palestinians don't think that the Jews deserve independence. They think about Judaism as a religion, and a religion does not have a right for a state. So I think we go back to the Balfour Declaration. The idea of establishing a Jewish state was correct. Even in the United Nations Partition Resolution, it says that the establishment of a Jewish state and an Arab state, not a Palestinian state. And as long as the Palestinians are unwilling to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, there will be no progress in any peacemaking.
Now, Professor Dershowitz,
I tend to agree with that. I think the importance of the Balfour Declaration was to show that Israel was established by the pen, not by the sword, by legal actions. Balfour Declaration was a letter by the minister. It was then followed by various treaties and by declarations of the League of Nations.
But
and
it
then
wasn't
the
a
United
legal
Nations
document,
had the
right?
partition, 2 states for 2 people. And then Israel declared its independence. It had to defend itself by the sword, but it was established by law, by the rule of law. Many of Israel's founders, from Herzl to Ben Gurion, had legal education. To Begin had legal education, and they were determined to see this done properly with all kinds of legal basis. So I think it's an event to be celebrated, the Balfour Declaration, and most Israelis do. Haaretz doesn't particularly celebrate the establishment of the Balfour Declaration. At least some of its journalists don't. They see it as a cause of the problem. But I see it as the beginning of establishing a nation state for the Jewish people based on principles of law, diplomacy, and justice rather than the power of the sword.
Well, Professor, our final question comes from a member of your favorite audience. Shaked Soudri is a student who is privileged to meet with you and ask you an important question in person. Let's hear from her.
Hi, I'm Shaked Soudri from Israel. I'm visiting New York with my father, and I'm about to ask Professor Dershowitz for advice. How should I choose a career?
So some people will tell you, do what you do best. They should do for a living what you do best. I'm going to tell you something different. You have to get up every single day loving what you do at work. Never say, thank God it's Friday. Say, thank God it's Monday. You have to be so anxious to get up every morning and work, because work becomes the dominant part of your life. It's not the only part. You want to have family, you want to have friends. Work's very important. And so pick something that you love. It may not be the thing you're best at. If I wanted to pick something I loved, of course, I'd be the point guard for the Boston Celtics, but I'm not good enough to do that. So you have to pick something that you're good at, but it doesn't have to be the thing you're absolutely the best at. I'll tell you a story about it. So I had a student who had been an engineering student at MIT and worked as an engineer, and then he went to law school. And everybody said, wow, you'd be a great patent lawyer because you're an engineer. So he went and became a patent lawyer. He hated it. And then he realized, why did he drop out of engineering school? Because he didn't like engineering, so why would he like being a patent lawyer? So he became a civil rights lawyer. May not have been as good at it, but he loved it. So you have to pick something to do as your work that you just love with a passion.
That's absolutely true. Do you love what you're doing still, Professor?
Oh, I get up every morning. I know it's going to be an exciting day. Somebody is going to attack Israel, and I'm going to have to defend it. Somebody is going to attack the Constitution. I'm going to have to defend it. Every day is unpredictable, but every day is an adventure. Look, I'm 79 years old. God has blessed me with relatively good health and vigor and strength, and every day is an exciting day for me. If I'm not involved in a case or a controversy, I'm writing a book. I'm writing 2 books now. One, The Case Against BDS, which will be out in a month, and second, a memoir of defending Israel over 70 years, from 1948 to 2018, and how different it's been defending Israel over really 7 long decades where Israel has changed, America has changed, the world has changed, attitudes toward Israel have changed. It's been a 70-year adventure, and I'm writing about it.
Well, I think I have a good question for you for our next show in that case. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. That's unfortunately all the time that we have for today. And
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Oh, happy Thanksgiving. That's true. How could we forget? Here in Israel, you almost forget. So we have you to remind us, Professor Dershowitz.
Be the first to wish my Christian viewers a Merry Christmas. I'm one of these Jews who loves wishing people a Merry Christmas. I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't think we're trying to steal Christmas. So for our Christian viewers, for our viewers of mixed background, Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, you're going to have another chance to say Merry Christmas because we still have some time to get all those holiday gifts in, right? That wraps up this edition of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to ILTV.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.